Welcome back to Trending in Education. Dan Strafford, Mike Palmer along with you with a very interesting topic, digital inclusion. We have two guests we'll get to momentarily. Always like to check in with Mike first. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dan, and I'm excited to include our guests. So I think we should dispense with the amenities and get right on to the introductions.
And we do that now. Xandi Wright, colleague here at Kaplan Test Prep, also a friend of the show, has been a contributor with articles in the past and really pushing us forward on some topics. And Angela Siefer, who is executive director over the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Xandi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Angela, how about yourself? Thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm super. I'm working outside today from Columbus, Ohio, so I'm feeling very fortunate.
Well, there you have it. That sounds like a very good way to record a podcast. Xandi, let's start with you and why you brought this topic forward. You brought it to us as a potential topic for covering here on the podcast, your connection with NDIA, but why is this important to you and what brought you into it and to study it further?
Sure. So I got into online education primarily through my previous work with Kaplan and went on to get my master's in adult education with a focus on online. And what I found was that a lot of people tend to make assumptions about that, if you put degrees online or if you put training programs online, that makes them more universally accessible. And kept finding that that's true in some ways, but not in all of the ways that we want it to be. So this has really become a passion area for me, and I was really excited to connect up with NDIA and find out that there are a lot of other folks working on these same issues.
Angela, could you give us a little bit of the background behind the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and exactly how it came to be and where it stands now as an organization?
Yeah, sure. NDIA got started about 5 years ago because there were some of us who'd worked in the field. We didn't call it digital inclusion forever. That's a more recent term. But meeting folks who are figuring out how their neighbors can have access to technology, affordable access, making sure there's digital skills training available, making sure the right devices are around. And so the individuals who tend to do this work are community-based organizations, libraries, housing authorities, and local governments. And we weren't nationally talking to each other, nor did we have a voice in DC. And then we knew there were policy decisions being made. So we're like, we need to just create something. So we did.
That's awesome. So just to clarify some of the terms, because it does seem like there's quite a few that are relevant to this conversation. There's the idea of digital inclusion. There's also the idea of the gap that exists or the gaps that exist, sometimes described as the homework gap. And then there's also, among other things, the notion of digital readiness. Can you talk us through some of these terms? Because this might be the first exposure for some of our listeners.
Right. And it's important to know that this is a new field.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about how long technology's been around in the big scheme of things and how important it is in our lives, it's actually pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
So those who are addressing these gaps where folks don't have access to technology or don't have digital skills, we keep evolving those terms. And as we move forward, we figure things out. So the NDIA community defined digital equity as individuals and communities having access to information, communication technologies to do whatever it is that they need to do. So that's a goal. And then digital inclusion is the activities that get us to that goal. So this is affordable home broadband, digital literacy training, the right devices, the right applications. It's the things that get us there. And then another common term is digital readiness. So this is related to the digital literacy piece of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is that we just need to be ready for anything.
Yeah.
Technology keeps changing. We can't be like, okay, well, look, I'm just done learning technology. None of us are ever done because it keeps changing. So as soon as you think and we all have experienced this, right? You think you've figured something out, and then the next day it changes.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, Angela, you were mentioning how back in the day, and I like to talk about back in the day. So please, good. I thought we're in a safe place. So back in the day, the digital meant access to computers, even in the pre-internet era. And you've been tracking this for some time. Can you talk about how the internet changed the conversation and how where we are today?
Yeah, so I got started in this work when I was a grad student, so that would be like 97-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And we were helping set up computer labs and helping folks create a coalition around what then we were referring to as the digital divide. And we would set up these labs, these computer labs, and we would be lucky if there'd be one computer in the lab that had access to the internet. And the rest of them were for learning how to use Microsoft Office or writing your resume, using applications that we didn't call them applications back then, right? Software that was on your computer and learning the computer that was in the lab. But then time has progressed and now we expect folks to have access to the internet. Assumptions are made by government agencies and by businesses and by nonprofits and everyone that we interact with that you do have access to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have access to the internet, then all of that great, the services that are out there and the products that are available, they're really only available to a portion of our communities.
Mm-hmm. And just how it breaks down across the U.S., can you describe where the real problem areas are?
Yeah, so there's 20 million people in the United States, or 20 million households that don't have access to the internet in their homes. And a lot of times folks assume that those are rural because the infrastructure itself isn't laid. But actually, of that 20 million households, 5 are rural and 15 million are what we would call urbanized areas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that it's not there; it's that it's too expensive.
Got it.
The biggest barrier now to having internet in your home is the cost.
Right. And folks will, I have heard, I'm not going to point fingers at the folks, but folks will say that, you can find Wi-Fi at a nearby coffee shop and, everybody has a cell phone. This is folks. This is not me.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody has a cell phone. What's up with that? Like, why isn't that just solving the problem? Show people where the nearest Wi-Fi hotspots are and boom, problem solved.
Right. So cell phones are, like, lots of folks do have cell phones, but the tighter your budget, the lower your data plan on
Mm-hmm.
that cell phone. So you may have a phone that has a very limited data or no data at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if we only rely upon those public locations for our Wi-Fi, think about all the ways that you use the internet. Would you want to do all those things in public locations, right? Do you want to do your banking at the McDonald's? Do you want to look up your health records and see, when your next doctor appointment is at the McDonald's? And I have 3 children, 2 of whom are now in college, but I can tell you that when they were teenagers, they did not do their homework when I wanted them to do their homework.
Sure.
I don't think they're all that unusual. They did their homework about 10 o'clock at night when I thought they should be sleeping. Right?
Yeah.
So you just cannot possibly send your teenager to McDonald's at 10 o'clock at night to finish their homework.
Right.
At that point, they're just not going to finish it.
Right.
That child doesn't do their homework, and the child who does have internet is doing their homework.
Right.
And then that speaks to the homework gap, right? So that's when people talk about the homework gap, what do they mean? What are we talking about? And are there any problems with that way of thinking?
Yeah, they're talking about students who do not have access to the internet in order to do their homework, because many schools do require require is a strong word. They often offer opportunities to strengthen your learning through the internet. So like my youngest child is in 4th grade and she is not required to go online for anything, but she can do these extra math prep and she can do these extra spelling prep. So she can do these things that enhance her learning. So even though in her case it's not required, she's definitely benefiting by having internet at home. And then as the children get older, it is actually required. There's a lot of research that's done online. There are a lot of applications out there now that do amazing, making learning fun, and it's awesome, but only for the kids who have internet at home.
Yeah. And actually, I want to come back to the flip side of that, where like there's a new movement against screen time, which I think is an interesting one. So I'm going to hold that thought. I wanted to bring Xandi in just as someone who's recently gone through a more formal educational program about digital inclusion. Any thoughts on that? Like, first off, where did you study? How did you get access to this curriculum? Like, how many programs are out there of this nature? You know, how did you find the program? What was it like? And what did you learn? Because it sounds like, you know, Angela was in from back in the day, and then you've been in of late where more formal education is emerging around these topics. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. So I got my master's in adult education with a focus on online and distance learning through Penn State, which Penn State has had a long-standing program on distance learning from well before it was online education, from, you know, when it was more of a correspondence model. Mm-hmm. And there are a few universities that have a particular focus on that distance education. Lots more that have a sort of an adult education or a blend of higher ed and adult ed. But so my experience, my program also was fully online and fully distance. So it was very meta of, you know, we're studying the ways that one makes engaging distance education over a distance, and getting to apply the things that we learned. But to your point about the ways that students are impacted by not having the internet at home, I wanted to add actually some of my professional experience more recently is teaching in-person college classes, you know, with students who mostly do have their own computers and have smartphones, but we do have students who come into, say, the writing center at a university with a 7-page paper that they wrote on their smartphone. Mm-hmm. And, you know, trying to imagine that use of that technology for a task that I think we would all probably agree is just there's a mismatch there, right, between the task and the tool. And so that becomes a real problem.
Yeah, and I bet both of you could tell us some stories around surprising ways in which people solve these access problems and, you know, work through more resistance than folks who just have high-speed internet in their homes. I don't know if you guys, you know, I mean, the example 7-page paper on your mobile phone is a great example of that. I don't know if there are other examples that come to mind, but it's easy to forget when you're in the position of access what it might be like if I had to, you know, solve these problems from a position where I don't have that access. I don't know if either of that have anything else to say on that.
There's been increasing understanding that not having access at home, that there's a time loss and a resource loss to go to that access. So unless you are lucky enough to have your library down the street or some other free public Wi-Fi right down the street, you have to transport yourself. So if you don't have a car, then you have to get on the bus. You have to pay for the bus. It's your time to get there. If you have children in tow and you need to fill out your application, how do you keep those children busy? Because oftentimes at a library, sometimes depending upon the library you're at, there can be a wait for those computers. So you can't just stick your child on another computer, or maybe your child's like 2 and you don't want them to be on a computer, right? Like, so it's hard. It's important for us to think about what we don't have to give up. We don't have to give up our time because we do have access to the internet right in our homes.
Yeah, and just I think Dan's got something he's gonna help affect a pivot in a second. It's gonna be very exciting. But like while we're on that point, you know, I'm a recent parent, so I have an 8-month-old at home, and you know, we try desperately to keep Matthew from looking at screens because every screen in the house has a magical glow that he is gravitating towards, and you know, it's just natural to gravitate towards these screens. And we've even covered in a few different ways on the show the increasing movement within Silicon Valley and among arguably the elite to say, you know, screens are bad for education. Access to digital is actually damaging to our culture, our educational system, and we need to get folks off of screens. I'm sure you guys are exposed to that line of thinking. Any initial thoughts on the straw man argument that I put out there?
It is a privileged person's option to say those things. Mm-hmm. Because they are probably still using the internet for their own purposes maybe even their own education. Maybe their sink broke and they're going to figure out how to fix it. And so then they look up the video of how to fix it and they didn't have to call the plumber.
Right.
So being able to say no internet is something someone who already has access can say.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense as somebody who regularly looks up how to fix things and then calls somebody anyway because I fear trying to fix it myself. But I think that's amazing and an eye-opening, hopefully an eye-opening thing for everybody, that we have to get out of our own world, our own biases, and see how other people are living. And that is where I want to pivot to, Angela, on the education side of educating people about this. How do we take this one up the chain policy-wise to the U.S. government, to state governments? I've seen Washington has a bill that is looking at digital inclusion. There is a digital inclusion bill in the spring for the U.S. Senate. So there are things happening, but I want to take that first, then take individual education. How does that happen? How do you take that as a mission and go forward and try to educate Congress people and others to move forward with this sort of bill?
Right. So this is something NDIA is doing, educating policymakers, educating the general public, educating media as to what is digital inclusion, what is needed to address it. And what we need is funding for digital literacy training is one. And that's where that's being addressed right now is the Digital Equity Act, which came out of Senator Murray, who's she's a senator, and her Digital Equity Act is addressing primarily the digital literacy training piece of it, but also the affordability piece of it. And so there's digitalequityact.org. There's lots of information there. But then the other piece of it is the access to the internet at home. And this can't be solved by just, and I say just, but it can't be solved with writing a check, right? Like it's not just a money issue. It is our structure in the United States is such that broadband access is a commodity. It's not considered a utility. It's not really regulated. I mean, it's regulated in super tiny ways, but not in a way where, for example, cost is the biggest barrier to having internet at home. There's no regulations about cost. So providers can charge whatever the market will allow. And because in most places there are usually only two providers.
Right.
If you're lucky, you might have three. If you're super unlucky, you only have one. If you're super, super, super unlucky, you have zero. So they can pretty much charge what they want to charge, which in the average tends to be in the $65 to $75 a month range, which can be totally out of reach for some households.
Absolutely. So now to the individual, and thinking of the people who are either personally biased for one reason or another, or simply living in a bubble that they have not yet burst and they haven't been able to look outside of their own small world. What's the steps there? Is that simply waiting for them to come around, or is there, and this is going to maybe sound wrong, but a more forceful way to get this information in front of people who may not otherwise seek it out?
So are you referring to people
individuals to help the process forward, like people in their homes who are right now on the internet, myself, somebody in a community that has those three ISPs are doing a good job of keeping costs somewhat down? How do we get educated enough to help move this process forward?
So there's quite a bit on our website, which is digitalinclusion.org. So we encourage you to go peruse around and see what's there. NDIA is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We have an affiliate structure where it's free to be a member. So we welcome anyone to come in, participate in our community, as Xandi has done. She is very active on the listserv and participates in the conversations, which we love. And so it's if this is an issue that concerns you, understanding what's been happening in other places, which is what NDIA facilitates, so that you can take action locally. In your own school district, in your own community, there are people, I guarantee you, no matter what kind of community you live in, if there's anyone living in poverty, you have folks who are living without home internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just sort of expanding the focus around inclusion, I think is useful too as a learning podcast. So like we've talked in the past about universal design for learning, and we've talked about the types of accommodations that are necessary to really enable true equity. And we've generally thought about that from the perspective of maybe folks who have access to sort of the fundamental connectivity and other inclusive aspects that you're talking about. How do you guys think about that? Like, sorry, I keep saying you guys, and it's 2019. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'll work on it. But any thoughts, maybe beginning with you, Angela, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, Xandi, just around the movement towards inclusivity and different ways in which good instructional design, good design of your sort of your materials thinks about equity and access. And I imagine there's a big part of digital that's related to that too, where like, whether it's closed captioning or, stuff for the visually impaired. Is that something that's directly in line with digital inclusion, or is that sort of a related set of concepts?
Yeah, it is directly in line. So NDIA focuses on the affordable home broadband access and the basic digital literacy training because there weren't others doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a very strong field around accessibility and that teaches us and shows us how to make sure that the materials are inclusive and to make sure that we are getting them to everyone. NDIA's affiliates are community-based organizations, libraries, housing authorities, local governments, and they do that at the local level. And they do that by making sure that their trainings are in different languages and that they are in accessible places, that they are close by where folks already are, so it's not hard to get to those trainings. One of the most brilliant new initiatives is putting digital literacy trainings in laundromats, often run by libraries, because the population you want to reach is in the laundromat and they don't have anything else to do and they got to keep the kids busy. So you can have some digital training activities and some fun stuff for the kids all in one place.
Got it. Anything to add on that, Xandi?
Yeah, I think Angela covered a lot of the big points, but thinking about designing learning for an online space, but making it accessible. Also, we talked about the homework app and the challenges of not having internet at home, and so something as simple as making your curriculum downloadable offline, so that I can go to the library right after school and download everything that I need to my device, and then be able to access it on my own time and not have to stay at the library and wait for my turn and everything. That can make a big difference. Thinking also just about what, who knows about your services. So I mentioned the work that I've been doing with the university and the Writing Center, and the Writing Center that I support has, you have to make an appointment through their website in order to sign up. And we realized that there's a whole population of students who don't have a computer and don't know that they can get this kind of support. And so we made paper flyers that go in the computer labs, right? Which, to Angela's point, that's where the people who we're trying to reach who don't have their own computers, they're writing their essays in the computer labs. And so, letting them know that this resource is out there and how to access it without relying on them to use their Google skills or their other, sort of web navigation skills to find us on their own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of, when you go through the persona exercises when you're designing for potential users, a persona that frequently may not be included is someone who's in a laundromat or someone who is, has limited access in a public library. So that's actually a good note. I think also a lot of our listeners, I think, are more on the learning designer side of the equation. And, honestly, that was eye-opening for me to think of that as well. Related note, I think, is the mindset problem that I think exists out there too. We talked about this when we covered digital readiness a couple years ago, is that there's really a wealth of educational resources that are available online, but many people just don't know how to start. They don't know that they're out there. Maybe they have, access to the internet and they have a mobile phone, but when they are online, they're not really thinking about education as something that can be delivered online. Mm-hmm. How do you guys, how do you, maybe beginning with you, Xandi, and then following up with Angela, like someone who's thinking about digital inclusion, how would you, how do folks in the field address some of those problems?
So libraries are doing a lot of that work, and there's actually a model that I really love that's peer-to-peer university, which partners with libraries and other community organizations to facilitate online or the use of online resources like Coursera and edX and other MOOCs and online training, but to provide a face-to-face community that's going through those courses together and that can provide some additional support around the technology side, and also just help people know that those tools are out there. So that's one of the big ways. I think that still, of course, requires people to go to their library and have an interest in pursuing that and find out that that's available. So that doesn't solve the root of the problem, but it's one of the solutions that we're seeing.
And Angela, anything to add on that?
Yeah, one of the things that we've learned through the NDIA affiliates is that there has to be a level of trust between whoever's teaching the technology and the person that is being taught, because technology is intimidating and there's lots of scary information out there about privacy and information being stolen and your financial life, going up in smoke because of someone, stealing all of your information. So the trust factor is huge. And so as the trust is established, and then that allows the instructor to then lead that person through even more and more skill sets of what they can do online. Digital literacy is not the kind of thing we're ever done learning. Digital skills just keep coming and coming and coming because we keep looking for them and we keep figuring it out. And so an important part of this, and it's very similar to issues being discussed in the broader education field, is just critical thinking. So do you feel confident that you can figure it out? You don't really know what it is, but can you figure it out?
Right. And, as someone who's pretty passionate about podcasting as a format, are you exploring different formats and the adoption of them? So you mentioned how technology is moving forward and changing. For me, I've sort of really had a sort of awakening around the power of audio and the accessibility. Even, if you have a Overdrive and Libby, you can get access to audiobooks through libraries. Also, as the husband of someone with a library science background, I have to give a nod to our librarians are they're among the heroes of this narrative too. But how do we think about providing the right tools to those gatekeepers so that as these new formats emerge, they can help educate the people who they get direct contact with? Because frequently the first form of interaction is going to be face-to-face, likely, to kind of get the readiness. And that's, even are there tactics that work effectively there? I'd love to hear maybe from you first on that, Angela.
I think the tactic is just finding something that people care about. Right. So we'll hear really great stories from the field of particularly senior citizens who were hesitant, but they know they have to do it because if they want to see their Social Security benefits, if they want to see their pictures of their grandkids, if they want to do all the things that they want to do, they have to figure out how to be online. But it's figuring out how to help them do that with that first step. So what is that first step? Maybe it's jazz music. Maybe it's recipes. Maybe it is those pictures of grandkids. But it's that first thing. And then the other things like online banking, which seem so scary, but are less scary when you have somebody leading you through it.
Yeah, I was thinking also about the healthcare exchanges, like a lot of the services that people most in need really need to find are only primarily accessible through digital.
Right.
Yeah. And Xandi, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I'll add. So you asked about getting the right tools to those folks who are working on the front lines, the librarians and the library staff and other folks in community organizations. And it's interesting that there's even still to some extent there is sort of a lingering divide or a spectrum of resources and resource wealth, I guess I would say, for example, big urban library systems that have a big budget and a team of folks who specialize in technology training and teaching versus smaller library systems or libraries where the person who is operating the the circulation desk is also the person who will have to step out from the desk to go and try to help you with your Social Security benefits, and then step back in to help people check out books, right? And so depending on the size of the organization and the size of the library, they're maybe more likely to be reliant on volunteers, or on, just how much time can I spare from my other required tasks in order to step out and try to help somebody with this. So there's not a great solution to that yet, unfortunately, other than maybe more funding and more training for especially the libraries that are, and the community organizations that don't yet have all of that in place.
Yeah, and just one quick follow-up, and I think Dan will kind of help bring us home. But the related thought is, like, do you have recommendations to folks who want to help solve this problem? Like, is it like what's the best thing for someone who feels like this sounds like something I could be activated against? Is it as simple as volunteering your time? Obviously, NDIA has a wealth of information that folks could explore, but maybe starting with you, Xandi, and maybe finishing with Angela, any recommendations to our listeners, or even if you want our listeners to activate other folks, people who want to address this problem, what are some ideas as far as how they might do that?
So, I mean, the short and easy answer is find out if your local library needs volunteers to help with technology training, because they probably do. A lot of them do. And that's an easy place to get started. There are lots of other community organizations that are doing this kind of work too, including organizations that serve populations experiencing homelessness, schools. I mean, lots and lots of different ways to get plugged in, but the libraries often are sort of the front lines of this particular challenge. And if they don't need that volunteer support, they will know who else does in the community.
Yeah, and I love the reference to seniors too, because I think that's a really interesting population to think about. But Angela, any additional thoughts?
On the NDIA website, which is digitalinclusion.org, there's a map of our affiliates. So you can see if we don't know everyone who's doing this work because it has been so local, organically grown, but we do know a lot of the folks. So you can see if there are lots of libraries doing it, but then are there other entities, those maybe who are serving seniors, who are serving immigrants, who are maybe through Park and Rec departments sometimes, that you can find them and see if they are accepting volunteers to help them. Mm-hmm. And then another quick easy one, not necessarily easy, but one that you could try to go at is through your own school district. So asking questions. So does our technology plan in this district address the fact that some of our kids don't have access at home? Mm-hmm. So, and then what are we doing about that? How are we addressing the fact that those kids don't have access at home? Because there are some school districts that are being really proactive, and they are figuring out how to get those kids access.
Right. And it probably is one of those things where, the majority of parents who are active in their local school probably already have access. So like they need to, it's almost like paying it forward in terms of your thinking, like, opening up your awareness that there are people who maybe have less access than you, and being willing to sort of represent for them because they may not actually be in the room.
Yes, they need your voice.
Mm-hmm.
I think I found my next volunteer gig in my daughter's schools, but we'll see how that turns out. I wanted to ask a forward-looking question. Mike often asks around skating where the puck is going rather than where it is. For you, Xandi, what trends are you watching, whether in this inclusion space or larger in education, that you think could influence the work that you're doing at present?
That's a great question. So for me personally, I am always interested in education that empowers people to learn from their peers, and to not see a sort of an authority figure or a teacher as the sole source of information. And I think that the internet, of course, has enabled a lot of that in ways that we really have never had before, or not significantly. So I'd be interested to see how that might help us to make some strides on digital inclusion and digital equity efforts, and maybe getting, particularly in some of the communities where we have a higher density of folks who are not connected, getting more of a peer-to-peer or an allyship network rather than a sort of top-down, we have the internet and so you should too approach, right? That I think there's a potential for better buy-in and better sort of camaraderie there.
And Angela, how about yourself? What trends are you watching? What do you think it could be included in the work you're doing and maybe even outside of it?
So there's an increasing understanding that everybody does need to have access to the internet and everyone does need digital skills. That's not how it used to be. So that's definitely trending in a very positive place where I don't have to argue with folks anymore about why this is important. Instead, we're talking about strategies. So that's positive. We're not quite at all those solutions yet, but we are on that trajectory where I think it is trending towards figuring it out in a real kind of way, and it's going to be big kind of real. Like we can't keep patchworking it as we have been doing.
So you guys have been amazing. Thank you so much. You people have been amazing. Thank you so much for the time. But I did have a couple that came to mind just as you were talking. One is that the internet is also a scary place for a lot of people. And there's fake news out there. Reliable sources are hard to find. So frequently, you give someone access to the internet, that can go in a lot of dangerous directions. So how do we make sure that digital education is a safe place for people to learn? And maybe Angela, if you could go first.
So it's the digital literacy, right? So none of us are 100% safe, of course. But those of us who do have digital skills feel more confident in looking up information, feeling mostly secure that what we're looking at is legit. There's always that, nobody's 100%. But if we can get more folks to have those digital literacy skills so that they can figure it out themselves, it really goes to that broader education issue, right? Can you figure something out? That's education. And
just to follow up real quick, are there ways to teach digital literacy, or is it more of so there are? I'm seeing from nonverbals that there are. So what are some of the ways, and maybe begin with you, Xandi? Any ways in which digital literacy can be taught?
Yes, I mean this is largely what I do these days, and so part of that is finding out what's motivating people to try to tackle this issue. I think Angela spoke to this of finding something that they care about, and then saying, great, here's how we can help you achieve not just that goal, but then other goals that might open up for you. It's also encouraging people to play and doing so in a space that's safe where they feel like they're not going to break something or, fall through a hole in the internet or something, that the way that children learn how to use an iPad, for instance, is by touching things and banging on it, and they're not afraid that they're going to break something. And when you're teaching adults how to use usually an expensive piece of equipment that they probably don't own, or if they do own it, it's because they spent a lot of money to get it. There's a lot of fear around, I'm going to do something wrong and I'm going to break it and someone's going to hack my email. And so trying to provide opportunities for people to explore and click on things and see what happens, and develop that sense of problem solving and digital problem solving without the fear. But then also, yes, definitely installing safeguards around how do I know if what I'm clicking on is legitimate?
If I had to tell my 2-year-old she wasn't allowed to open my phone and find the app she had, I need to put the safeguards on for myself because of what she may be clicking on, but less so what she's doing on there. But this is all amazing information. It's been a pleasure to talk to you both. And I think hopefully our listeners got a lot out of this. And also moving forward, folks who visit your website and get into exactly what you're trying to do. This seems like a topic that's only going to become bigger and bigger as time goes on. As Angela said, the technology just keeps growing. So it will be one we'll track here. Angela Siefer, Executive Director at NDIA. Xandi Wright, friend of the podcast, colleague. Thanks so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
As always, you can find us over on Twitter at trendinganded, trendingandeducation.com, Trending and Ed as well on Facebook. We want to hear what you thought about this episode and so much more. Find us on any one of those. Be happy to hear from you. Until next time, you've been listening to Trending in Education.